Davante Adams wants a trade, and there's speculation that he'd love to play with Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. And the Washington Commanders absolutely have a reason to explore the idea as they seek to grab a firm hold on the NFC East division race. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, everybody, to today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. You can also find me writing about the Washington Commanders for WUSA9.com this season. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Thank you for coming through for today's episode and every dayers. I appreciate you coming through for every episode. Locked On Commanders is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, where we are going to take our first look at the Week 5 opponent, Cleveland Browns, looking at the offense that is currently struggling out there in Cleveland. Also, try to identify some defensive weaknesses for Jaden Daniels and the Commanders offense to take advantage of. But first, we're going to start with the story that the entire National Football League is talking about, and that is Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver Davante Adams wanting a trade and whether or not it makes sense for the Washington Commanders to get into that conversation. If you want even more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, all you have to do is become an insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And from there, you can text me your thoughts, your comments, your questions. I'm going to text you my comments, my ideas. I'm also going to text you a whole lot of information from practices, games, press conferences, bonus content, and exclusive invites to events like Zoom conferences that are only for insiders. We did one last week pregame, we did one postgame. It was a lot of fun. So if you want to get in on all that, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to try it out for free for the first 2 weeks. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Las Vegas Raiders star wide receiver Davante Adams wants a trade from the Las Vegas Raiders reportedly, and given what the Washington Commanders have done already in this season, there's absolutely reason to believe that they should be in on the bidding to add one of the best receivers of his generation onto this roster. So here's the dynamic of this whole situation, right? Wide receiver Davante Adams turns 32 this December. So he is long in the tooth. He's considered old in the National Football League, and he is under contract through the 2026 season currently with the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, if the Washington Commanders or anybody that trades for Davante Adams, they would have to rework his contract, right? He's going to want some more guaranteed money. There are no guarantees left in his contract after this season, so he's going to want some guarantees spread out throughout the rest of the contract, maybe some more money, depending on where he goes and all that stuff. But as it stands right now, according to reports, guys like Dan Graziano of ESPN, whoever trades for him, it is set to pay somewhere between $10 to $14 million of his current year's contract. Again, depending on which week the trade is made, and depending on how much of that salary the Las Vegas Raiders end up eating in a potential trade as well. Bottom line is the Washington Commanders have that amount of cap space available, can do some things to make sure that money is available to bring a guy like Davante Adams on there from an administrative standpoint. So as far as the roster is concerned and all that stuff, no issues, no hangups in preventing the Washington Commanders from doing that deal. You can rework money, you can move it, you can shift it. There's too many mechanisms in place to sit here and think, well, the money is too rich, so that's not going to happen. So then the next question then turns into, is Davante Adams still Davante Adams? Well, he's only played in 3 games so far this season. I say only 3, but he's played in 3 of the 4 Raiders games this season. Week 1, 5 catches, 59 yards against the Los Angeles Chargers. Week 2, 9 catches, 110 yards and a touchdown against the Baltimore Ravens. Week 3, 4 catches, 40 yards, and a loss to the Carolina Panthers. The Las Vegas Raiders were able to beat the Baltimore Ravens, and then the next week, inexplicably lost to the Carolina Panthers. Didn't play in week 4, with the report being a hamstring. Most people tend to believe that it's not really a hamstring. What it is Davante wants out, and basically that's just kind of where they're going with it. He's like, oh, my hamstring, I'm not going to play. And then also, by the way, I want to trade. There's also the story of Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce apparently liking a Instagram post or a tweet or some sort of social media traffic where someone speculated that Davante Adams may have played his last snap as a Raider, may get traded. And apparently Antonio Pierce liked that social media posting, which is super weird. Kay Adams asked Davante Adams on a recent appearance if he had talked to Coach Pierce since that incident happened. And Davante said no, he hasn't spoken to Coach Pierce. So there certainly seems to be a drifting apart between the Raiders organization and wide receiver Davante Adams. So does it make sense for the Washington Commanders? So here's why it makes sense for the Washington Commanders playing that side of this thing. Right now, there's no true blue number 2 wide receiver in Washington. It's kind of a weekly rotation. And for me, that's actually kind of been a strength of this team. You have the opportunity, you have guys available, whether it be Noah Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, it could be Luke McCaffrey coming up. There have been guys that are willing to and able to, and Cliff Kingsbury's been able to scheme guys open outside of Terry McLaurin, even though Terry McLaurin does have the largest pass air yardage share in the National Football League amongst all NFL receivers. There have still been guys who, in clutch situations, show up for the team and become that kind of pseudo number 2. And really, in a sense, the trio of Noah Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, and Luke McCaffrey have become wide receiver number 2. But adding Davante Adams gives you 2 clear, true blue targets on a down in, down out basis that your quarterback, Jaden Daniels, can rely on. And also trickle down economics. If Davante Adams is on the field and on the roster, well, when Noah Brown gets on the field, Olamide Zaccheaus, Luke McCaffrey, when any of them are on the field or all of them are on the field, then they each immediately get better matchups, right? Because if you're focusing resources on Terry, you're focusing resources on Davante Adams, clearly you can't have as many resources dedicated to guys like Noah Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, and Luke McCaffrey. And it helps Terry McLaurin because now he's not the only number 1 receiver on the field by himself. Zach Ertz in the running game certainly are going to benefit from defenses having to stay true to those receiving threats as well. And you're looking to possibly improve a passing game that's already the 12th ranked passing game in the National Football League this year, 3rd ranked in yards per pass. So they've been very effective. The reason it's 12th ranked overall is because they just haven't had to use as much, been able to use the ground game, bleed the clock, do all those things. But yards per pass, you're 3rd. Certainly the opportunity to potentially improve on that. Now, even with all of his unhappiness, nobody in Las Vegas that I've seen has been talking about Davante Adams being a disruption or being a problem. Certainly, this is going to be a distraction, but this is kind of the end of it. But there's been no lead up of Davante getting into arguments with players or loafing on the practice field. All these things, at least again, not that I've seen. I don't cover the Raiders, but I haven't seen any of those. And then from a Raiders perspective, look, PR matters to these teams. The Raiders and Commanders don't play each other again until 2025, and even that game is in Washington. So if you're the Raiders, you really don't have to worry about Davante coming into Las Vegas and making you look stupid. So those are the reasons why it makes sense. Why doesn't it make sense potentially? Well, there's an incredible amount of draft capital the Las Vegas Raiders are going to be looking for. And according to the early reports from guys like Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, and the like, they're talking at least a 2nd round pick. Like, it's a package of picks. There's got to be a 2nd rounder in there. So you're talking, I don't know, a 2nd and 2/3, maybe a 2nd and a 3rd and a 5th. I don't know what exactly they're looking for, but you're starting off with the asking price of a 2nd round pick. And when you're talking about a team in the Washington Commanders and a general manager, Adam Peters, who obviously clearly he's stated it, he's displayed it, does not want to, he wants to build through the NFL draft. Or you're talking about trading for a guy who is not going to be around for very long, past his current contract, if at all. Giving up that 2nd round pick for who's a guy who, you go get the right receiver with that 2nd round pick, you might have a really good receiver on your roster for 4+ years. You give it up for Davante Adams, you might have a top receiver on your roster for 3 years. Like, where's the trade-off work? And then of course you're giving them more than a 2nd and more than that here potentially coming up as well. The rework of the contract, could it include guaranteed money down the road? The Commanders didn't really want to tie themselves to a guy like Brandon Ayuk for a lot of money down the road. They haven't really wanted to do that with a lot of veterans, right? Guys like Bobby Wagner are in here on a 1-year deal. So is Davante Adams talented enough and different enough to warrant going ahead and making that move? And then you've got egos. You really have to ask the question of egos, right? Terry McLaurin has been the number 1 receiver in Washington for quite a while now. Is he going to accept being the number 2 behind Davante Adams? Like, a lot of people would look at Davante Adams and say, okay, well, now you're the number 1, Terry's the number 2, and he's a really good number 2. If the Commanders take the stance that Terry is still number 1 and Davante is the number 2, how's Davante Adams going to feel about that? Do they do co-number 1s? They're both our number 1 receivers, and are they okay with that? And does it simply, as we're even having this conversation, does it just complicate things too much? Is it almost one of those things where it's don't fix what ain't broken, right? Competition is going to make things complicated because there are several win now teams expected to be in competition for Davante Adams in this situation. The Kansas City Chiefs chief among them. However, there's zero chance, right? The Las Vegas Raiders trade Davante Adams, the Kansas City Chiefs. So while people are going to talk about him, we got to let him out there. I don't see that happening. The Green Bay Packers, they just lost Christian Watson to an ankle injury for a little while. I'm not sure how long that's going to be, but they could certainly use a guy like Davante out there with Jordan Love. The New York Jets have been an obvious selection with Aaron Rodgers out there. The Baltimore Ravens, certainly wouldn't hate to join Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and Devante Adams, Sarah Walsh on Good Morning Football. Even point out the Ravens have never had a Pro Bowl receiver make the Pro Bowl as a receiver while with the team. The Steelers were in on Brandon Ayuk, so certainly they could be in on Devante, and the New Orleans Saints with Derek Carr, who Davante Adams went to Las Vegas in part to play with when he left the Green Bay Packers. So there's certainly a lot of suitors. Those suitors are probably going to drive up the draft capital asking price that the Las Vegas Raiders come through. So there's reasons to do it, reasons not to do it. Will it be done? Time will tell on that. But what we do know will be done. Week 5, Cleveland Browns coming to Washington. We open up our week preview of that game coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that thanks to our friends over at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you get an idea, you can check out the latest stats, you can view the play-by-plays, so much more on the same place where you place your bets. It's a one-stop shop for all your information needs, and there's so many in-game wagers that you can make on FanDuel that it's super clutch to be able to get all that information in real time. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets if you're a new customer, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bets. Right now, the Washington Commanders are favored for the second time this season. The last time was their last home game against the New York Giants. Currently, they're projected to beat the Cleveland Browns by 3 points at home. The over-under on that game is 43.5 points total. So if you feel like the Commanders will win and win by at least 3, you can take that, or you can just go straight up money line to predict the Commanders win just in general. To take full advantage of all of those opportunities, just go to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Segment 2 now here on Locked On Commanders. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen, your first view today and every day. Just got done talking about the pros and cons of a potential trade for wide receiver Davante Adams. If I'm being completely honest, it's a move that I would love to see happen and celebrate with all of you and cover, but it's also a move I don't see happening. Happening. However, look, don't underestimate the potential. Even Dan Quinn admitted that he was surprised about how effective the Washington Commanders have been so far this season. And look, if they feel like they've got something brewing, and depending on how long this thing cooks out for, we're entering week 5. If this thing enters week 6, week 7, and then the Commanders got 2 losses, 1 loss come that point in time, I mean, they might look at this thing and say, hey, look, we go out there, get Davante Adams, we can probably secure ourselves an NFC East title, make some noise in the postseason, do things like that. Don't underestimate the appeal of that possibility changing a little bit of the way people see things. So never say never, but there's certainly going to be a lot of competition. And I have a feeling that amount of competition could actually drive that price up to about #1, a first-round pick. Maybe not a first-round pick in total, but a first-round pick value at a minimum. So that would certainly complicate things. Now we look to the Cleveland Browns. Week 5 matchup. The Washington Commanders are going to host Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns in Northwest Stadium out there in Landover, Maryland. And the Cleveland Browns through 4 weeks. We're going to start with the Browns offense going up against Commanders defense, because obviously the Commanders defense has been, the weaker part of this whole operation so far. Granted, week 4, a very holistic, very well-rounded 3-phase win for the Commanders, but that's kind of a 1-week situation, whereas the offense has obviously been doing it pretty well for at least a few weeks, if not the entirety of the season. I was pretty happy with the efficiency in the offense in week 1, give or take, given the rookie quarterback situation. But anyway, quarterback Deshaun Watson. So far this season, it's well publicized. He's not been doing well, but he's 3rd in pass attempts in the NFL this season, has a 61.5% completion rate, which ranks 26th among the top 32 NFL quarterbacks in pass attempts. He's got a 2.7% touchdown rate, which is 25th, which is not good. A 2% interception rate, which is 15th, which is right in the middle of the pack. He's been sacked 19 times, which is a league high this season. An 11.4% sack rate is the 3rd highest sack rate this season. So Deshaun Watson has been under duress, and that duress is causing him to be inaccurate, rush decisions, and potentially make poor throws that opposing defenses are trying to take advantage of, and Washington Commanders defense will try to take advantage of this weekend. Their wide receivers, top 3 wide receivers, Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore. Cooper is the most targeted by nearly 2 targets per game, above Jerry Jeudy, who leads the team in receptions and yards, but is 36th in yards overall in the NFL. So even though he leads the team in yards individually, not doing well when compared to his peers. Jerry Jeudy is also 84th in yards per catch, which is 10.9. For context, Washington has 2 receivers ahead of Jerry Jeudy in the rankings, and Jerry Jeudy is the top yards per catch receiver in Cleveland right now. Amari Cooper leads the team with 2 touchdown catches so far this season, and Elijah Moore has the highest catch percentage at 66.7. That ranks 49th among NFL receivers with at least 8 targets, and the Commanders have 3 receivers, Noah Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, and Terry McLaurin, who all rate higher in catch percentage than Elijah Moore, who again is the highest Browns player. Jerry Jeudy's success rate is 46.7, so success rate again, 20% of first down yards, 40% of first down yards, 60% of second down yards, 100% of third down yards. Jerry Jeudy's success rate given the down and distance is 46.7%. That ranks 66th in the NFL. And you compare that to Noah Brown, whose success rate is 90%, ranks number 1 in the NFL. So receivers, when the quarterback's struggling, you expect the receivers to be struggling as well. And certainly that is the image that you get. Tight end David Njoku has not played for Cleveland since week 1, but Mary Kay Cabot of Cleveland.com is reporting that he may be able to go this weekend. He did practice a little bit last week in a heavily taped right ankle. So if he is getting ready to play, he's certainly not 100%. But David Njoku coming back for Cleveland would certainly give them a shot in the arm and make them a little bit more dangerous against this Washington Commanders defense for sure. In fact, it would actually be the first time this season that we see the Washington Commanders go up against a team that likes to use their number 1 tight end, actually has their number 1 tight end, right? The Cardinals like to use Trey McBride, but Trey McBride was not available to them last weekend. Running back Nick Chubb is also expected to be activated from the physically unable to perform list this week and get him going in practice. However, coming off the injury that he's coming off of from last year, I do not see him playing this week. It's going to be at least 2 or 3 weeks, I would imagine, before Nick Chubb is out there on the playing field. As far as the offensive line is concerned, right now the Cleveland Browns have the 5th worst pass blocking efficiency rate in the National Football League as a unit. They've allowed 6 sacks through 4 weeks, which is the 14th most in the NFL. However, most of that is because of Deshaun Watson escaping or getting the ball away. He's been hit 17 times, which is the most in the NFL, and he's been hurried 43 times, which is the 2nd most in the NFL. So a good opportunity potentially for the Washington Commanders defense to follow up their best pass rushing performance of the year against the Cardinals with another similarly effective one here against the Cleveland Browns. Starting center Ethan Posick was injured last week for the Browns versus the Las Vegas Raiders, but apparently he might be able to play again, according to Mary Kay Cabot. Backup Nick Harris came in last week, did not do very well, and he was actually called for a holding penalty on an 82-yard touchdown pass to Amari Cooper that would have had the Cleveland Browns in the lead with about 10 minutes left in the 4th quarter. Ultimately, the Raiders didn't score again, so in theory, you could say they would have won that game last week. Ultimately, that pass being called back on that hold by Nick Harris. And, look, Browns fans didn't like the call. I watched it. I feel like it was a pretty fair call, so it is what it is. They're also hoping to get offensive tackles Jedrick Willis Jr. and Jack Conklin back this weekend in their place. One of the tackles has been DeJuan Jones, right tackle, who has struggled pretty mightily, but is also dealing with an MCL injury himself. So they got 2 starting tackles out, or they've had 2 starting tackles out at least for a game or so. And one of their backups is also injured and trying to go out there and play. So the Cleveland Browns offensive line banged up, to say the least. I think the Cleveland Browns on paper, if everybody is healthy and everybody's doing what they need to do, I think probably seem like a pretty good matchup. And they've certainly struggled this year. I think a lot of that has to do with injuries. So we'll see how healthy they get towards the weekend and to see how we gauge this matchup. Of course, we got crossover Thursday with Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns coming up in our next episode. So he'll dive even deeper into what's going on with the Browns offense, just as he will with the Browns defense. But we're going to take our first look at this weekend's defensive matchup for the Washington Commanders offense. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And that's coming up thanks to our friends over at Prize Picks. And you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas, week to week, game day action on pretty much anything you're looking to get into. And you sign up today and you'll get $50 instantly whenever you play $5. The first time you play $5. You don't even have to win. Play $5, pick 2 to 4 players, 2 to 6 players, and you don't even have to win. You get that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So if you think Justin Jefferson is going to get more than 83.5 yards this coming weekend, put that in your mix, put $5 on it for your first time play, and you get that $50 bonus. Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we started off talking about Davante Adams wanting out of Las Vegas and whether or not where it does work for the Commanders, where it doesn't work for the Commanders. We then switched over to our Week 5 preview of the Cleveland Browns, the Week 5 opponent for the Washington Commanders, talking about the Browns offense versus the Commanders defense. Certainly, Browns offensive unit not firing on all cylinders, I think, to say the least, and the Commanders defensive unit firing on all cylinders for the first time last week. Looking to keep that going for another week. Certainly seems like an opponent they might be able to pull that off against. Cleveland Browns defense has been the strength of this team so far. The Washington Commanders offense has been the strength of this team so far. So you got strength on strength, weakness on weakness. But again, on the Commanders side, that weakness, at least for a week, was a strength as well last week. So this week, the Commanders' strength, Jaden Daniels, quarterback, third highest quarterback passer rating in the NFL overall this season. Now, the Cleveland Browns, according again to Mary Kay Cabot, got a lot of information from Mary Kay Cabot at Cleveland.com. Pretty happy to find out that Martin Emerson Jr., cornerback, friend of Emmanuel Forbes, has been cleared of concussion protocol on Monday. Said it's good news for the secondary. Here's the thing, though. Martin Emerson has a 37.2 pass coverage grade on PFF. That is the worst among 101 NFL corners that have 45 or more coverage snaps this season, which is bad no matter how much you like or dislike PFF's grading system. Not a huge fan of PFF's grading system. What I do like about PFF's grading system is that they're consistent in how they grade. So what I take more stock in is the difference between this guy and that guy in grade than I do the actual specific grade, if that makes sense. But the bottom line is, no matter how you grade it, Martin Emerson's been one of the worst cornerbacks this season in the NFL. So while that may be good news for the Cleveland Browns to get him back because he's better than the alternatives, certainly not a bright spot in defense this NFL season. Emerson is allowing a 65% completion rate when targeted. He's allowed 148 yards, which is the 25th most in the NFL, has only forced 2 incompletions this season, and he's given up 2 touchdowns. He's allowing a passer rating of 120.4, which is the 16th highest in the NFL among NFL cornerbacks. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ball, Denzel Ward, Ohio State legend, Denzel Ward, friend of Terry McLaurin, so a lot of friends in this matchup, is allowing the 17th lowest passer rating, just a 62.4, and he has the 26th best coverage grade in the league right now. So clearly, Denzel Ward is the better of the two, and it's not even stinking close. Linebacker Jordan Hicks left last week's Browns game against the Las Vegas Raiders with an elbow injury. He's day-to-day, so we'll keep an eye on whether or not he's going to play. He's a starting linebacker, and if he's out, that could be a big problem for the Cleveland Browns, who gave up 152 yards rushing to the Las Vegas Raiders last week. And coming into last weekend's game against the Raiders were the worst rushing team in the league offensively, and then the Browns said, have 152 yards of offense. So the Browns defense has been their strong suit, but certainly still not the strongest in the league, still has their vulnerabilities. They're 11th in yards per game right now, 9th in yards per play. That's good overall. Their rush defense, however, 19th per game, 22nd per play. So that's where the Cleveland defense seems to be the weakest. Just so happens that the Washington Commanders like to take advantage of teams that don't have strong run defenses. So it matches up pretty well. Pass defense is top 10, top 8 per play overall. They've yet to intercept a pass, however, and they are tied at 11th in sack rates. They have the 18th ranked red zone percentage as well. So when you look at all of this stuff, what does our initial overall game plan look like? And certainly game plans are much more detailed than any media member is going to say, here's my quote unquote game plan. But overall, look, you want to pressure the Cleveland Browns offense. I think with 5 guys or less, I don't think you want to bring 6, too many times. Go ahead, try to get pressure on them and their banged up offensive line with 4 or 5 rushers. Keep guys in coverage. Try to take advantage of Deshaun Watson hurrying his throws, rushing his passes. And then if you can't take advantage of that, at least force long drives and chances of them making a mistake and then take advantage of those mistakes. This is going to be a game I feel like where the Washington Commanders secondary is going to have the opportunity to come away with an interception or two. It's just about taking advantage of those opportunities when they come. On the offensive side of the ball, this is going to sound very similar to what they've done here already this season. Run the ball, set up the play action, shrink the defense, make them come down into the box. The Arizona Cardinals played with a very lightly stacked box in week 4. Didn't really change from that. And you saw what happened. Brian Robinson ate them alive. Jeremy McNichols ate them alive. So force the Cleveland Browns to basically make the same decision. Either stay light and just get gashed all day, or go ahead and start stacking that box and then give us better matchups on the outside with our receivers and over the middle with our tight ends. Prevent the pass rush from having an impact in the game by doing that, and you stay away from Denzel Ward, who does not appear to travel. It appears that Denzel Ward basically stays on the left side of the defensive formation. So at the same time, when you do want to go out there and target guys like Terry McLaurin, move him around, get him away from Denzel Ward, get him against guys like Martin Emerson, and take advantage of those easier matchups. So that's the initial look at the Cleveland Browns. Again, crossover Thursday coming up. On our next episode, Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns and I will sit down and talk about this weekend's matchup, so we'll get some more insight into this Cleveland Browns team when he comes through for that. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me. And all you got to do that, go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders and get the first 2 weeks free of being a Locked On Commanders insider. And you can talk to me after this weekend's game from the surface of Northwest Stadium. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast first. The madman Tyler Rowland kicks you off in the morning with a double shot of NFL espresso. Then in the afternoon, go by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's a new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through every day. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you next time right back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.